Well, who goes first, Dan? Would you like to go first?
Why don't you ask the first question?
I will ask the first question of you then, because this is going to be a kind of tennis game of behavioural science questions. And the first question is, from unsurprisingly an anonymous entrant, in your professional view, what is the best Tinder opening message I can send to guarantee a response? Now, notably, they haven't mentioned whether they're after quality or quantity, which is an important marketing distinction. But I'd be intrigued to know, given that they simply want to guarantee a response, what would that be?
So I'm not sure. I would go for guaranteeing a response, but I would think about guaranteeing something that would happen. And I would vote for a question that is the following: if we met tonight and had sex and you got pregnant, or I got pregnant, depending on the gender, what would you like to do? And the reason I like that question is that it assumes that there's a meeting. It assumes there's going to be sex, which I think is the point of Tinder. But then it really asks a moral question about what would you like to do. And so under the disguise of the moral question, you could have an interesting discussion that assumes a meeting and a sexual encounter.
So it's effectively, that's the presumptive sale. I can, by the way, give a bit of Tinder advice from one of my colleagues. I'm not going to name her, which is that she has had a very successful message, which was simply, let's get pizza, which is quite good because pizza's almost universally popular. The only thing is that the close of the sale, it got a lot of kind of cold prospects, but when she revealed that her favourite pizza was Hawaiian and had pineapple on it, about 50% of the people just backed out. So whatever you do, I can give a supplementary bit of advice there. Do not admit that you like Hawaiian pizza because it's a massive turn-off to a significant body of people. But yours is very, very clever.
But by the way, you don't necessarily want a maximum amount of people responding. You do want to use some filtering.
You do want a bit of filtering, yeah. I mean, I'd probably answer that question if someone posed it to me and said, I'd name my super yacht after the child. I think that, that would probably help. But we can, because you can then slip in a little bit of ancillary information. That's kind of humble brag, I think, isn't it? You could probably get away with that. Okay, go on.
If it's true, yeah.
Funnily enough, you better fire back.
Okay.
The next question I've got is also bizarrely sexual.
Okay.
In the interest of variety, go on. What's your next question?
So my question would be, somebody asked the question of, why is there a significant advantage for sports team in home court? Now, I don't know if it's true. I haven't looked at the data, so I don't know if it's true
Yeah. I'm pretty sure the home advantage is the best attested statistic in sports. Yeah.
Okay, so assuming that's true, why do you think psychologically there is a home advantage?
It's interesting because there are various theories, and of course COVID, where you've had games played in the absence of a crowd, will provide us with a whole load of test data which should reveal what's going on. I know some people looked at the data. When you have pitches where you have an athletics track going around the pitch, hence the crowd is slightly further away because they're those sort of 6 tracks for running events that are between the crowd and the thing. I think that has some effect. Some of it, of course, might be familiarity and travel costs, because in NFL football, you might have flown for 6 hours and you've got to stay in a hotel room and and have some wild Dr. Dre style pool party the night before. So that might impose further costs. But I'm fairly sure that it's well attested and that actually the crowd support is significant. It's simply, an interesting thing they haven't measured is whether pit girls improved Formula One driving. Because I know that was very much a Me Too movement campaign to get rid of them. But if you think about it purely hormonally, probably having a lot of attractive people floating around the pit lane might actually increase testosterone levels in drivers and therefore increase their bravery. It's a very sad admission and sad reflection on the male psyche, but we should probably measure that as well. But I think it probably is mostly the noise and the support and the feeling, and also, of course, we've got to remember the contrary effect on the away team, who have to face barrages of hostility.
Yeah. So we have familiarity with the court, could be one of them, even small things. And familiarity, so for example, when people take a test, a math test, in the same classroom that they were tested, they score better. There are things about the environment that remind us of all kinds of things. So familiarity is not just, I know where the line is. It could bring back things about, here is how we practice, here is the move we planned on. It could help coordination. So that's familiarity. There's travel cost, which is, it's a hotel, it's not as comfortable, it's not your home. And then there are the fans. And you propose that there's more excitement to please your fan. Maybe there's could be testosterone if there's gender issues. And if I remember correctly, there are even studies showing that roaches find food in a maze faster when they're being watched. So there's something about the enthusiasm and energy that we could get from other people. And of course, COVID would be a really interesting test for that, although other things happened during COVID as well. Okay, back to you.
Okay, I've got a next one, which bizarrely, okay, this is from Diana Fleischman and Jeffrey Miller, who are openly, I'm not suddenly outing them here, they're in a polyamorous relationship normally.
They're married now.
They are actually married, but polyamorously. And it says, lockdown restrictions have resulted in my husband and I experimenting with monogamy. Should we accept our new lifestyle, or is it a phase we will outgrow when lockdown is lifted? So there you have a case of the paradox of non-choice, I guess. So I'd love to know your advice for Jeffrey and Diana.
So first of all, I think that very generally about COVID, COVID got us to re-examine lots of things about life. So discovered I can make an omelette. We discovered lots of things about ourselves. We were restricted. About 4 years ago, I tried to do a study where companies would let their employees work at home and their employees' effectiveness. And I couldn't find a company that would let me do that. Guess what? It's not a good experiment, but we created it in a big way. So I think COVID got us to do all kinds of things, and we shouldn't give up on them that quickly. Like, there's some things that might be worthwhile to keep for a while. Now, presumably, being monogamous when you have no other options is different than when you have other options. But what I would certainly recommend is don't give it up yet. Explore it, right? It's about, right, be in that condition of the experiment for a little longer and see how it functions when you have other opportunities. Is it better? Is it worse? And I think it's true for lots of things. It's true for cooking more at home. It's true for new hobbies we develop. For me, it's true about traveling. Right? I used to travel about 300 days a year. All of a sudden, things have changed. I'm not going to give it up that quickly. I'm going to explore how these changes could integrate in the post-COVID world, and then see maybe there's a better equilibrium.
Because you're absolutely right in that this equilibrium question, and of course, social equilibria are very, very strong, aren't they? We're forced to do things that everybody else does. So that I always used to comment that in 2018, if you suggested doing a video conference rather than flying to Frankfurt, you looked like a bit of a weirdo. You know, you were the awkward squad, effectively. And now that's been completely normalized. And there's a famous experiment, of course, on the London tube network where a tube strike on several lines forced people to change their journey to work, just for a period of about 5 days. And they looked at the data and found that about 5% of people continued travelling to work in the way that they'd only adopted because the strike had forced them to try it as an alternative. And they actually found that you could effectively make the tube network more efficient if you closed parts of it down at random every now and then and forced people to experiment a bit more widely. So I completely agree with you. If you discover things you like about a new equilibrium, don't throw them away and revert to the status quo before. Actually, if you revert, do it one thing at a time and do it tentatively, because the new equilibrium, the new calibrated equilibrium might be better than the old. So I think that's a great answer. And if they find monogamy too boring, they could experiment with, I guess, paraphilia. There are all sorts of other things you could get into without necessarily breaking the monogamy. So no. Jeffrey and Diana, best wishes to you. But keep up the good work. Right, okay. Back over the net.
Okay, so I also got a few other sexual questions or dating questions, but I'll do another one. So there's a guy who asked, how can he stop losing his house keys? He said he loses his house keys once a month. His flatmate lose their keys more often, but he wants to reduce the frequency of losing his keys. How would you recommend that he does that?
I mean, where does he lose them? Does he lose them at home? I mean, there are technical devices where you can get little Bluetooth devices that beep. And I have to say that would be a first step, I think. But does he lose them out of the house or does he lose them in his house? Because
he did not specify. You can choose how you want to answer this.
I'd put a hook straight inside the door as soon as he gets home, and I'd create one. Now, by the way, when he goes on holiday, he needs to hide them, and his car keys, because there's a great theft thing, which is people leave their keys close to the door. So I didn't want to promote. We've got a lot of people from the Thames Valley Police watching, and I wouldn't want to create a spate of house breakings. But actually, if you have an instant reminder when you get home, and you actually have a key rack inside the door, that will probably work most of the time. It's the same thing I always say, which is you have to spot exactly the right moment at which to intervene to adopt a new behaviour. And since he's got the keys in his hand when he's coming through the front door, then the movement of not returning them to pocket but putting them to wall requires less behavioural change than remembering to put them in a vase in the bedroom or something like that. So I definitely choose a design solution there, I think. If he loses them when he goes out, he should probably stop drinking or give up crack cocaine. But if he loses them at home, I think the key rack very, very close to the ingress to the house is the best immediate solution.
Yeah, and I think the main issue with this question is the word remember.
Yeah.
And the thing is that memory is not going to be effective here. No. If you think that once a day you would put your keys in a different place and you would remember, that's not going to work out because the memory is going to be confused. Is it from yesterday, the day before? Like even if you think about, I put my key here, I put my key here. After 100 days doing it, you would not remember if your memory is from yesterday or from a week ago or from 2 months ago. So because of that, it's not really a memory question, it's a habit question. And for a habit question, something needs to be routinized and easy. And also you need an evoking cue.
Yeah. So
if you come home and you see a hook, you don't want the hook to be hidden. You want it to be straight out so that you see it. It reminds you. It's not that you have to think about it. It's that the hook reminds you that you want to put your key. You put your key there, and after a while, it would become routinized. And in general, habits can be our enemies and they can be our friends. They are our enemies when it comes to things like ordering food in restaurants. There's all kinds of places where we do too much. But in terms of good behavior, it's an investment of time initially,
Yep.
But once a habit is created, it can stay with us for a long time.
I think, I mean, there are technological solutions to this. I mean, it's extraordinary what percentage of our lives we apparently spend looking for things, if you add it all up. But I think a simple design solution, you could, if you had some sort of smart home, you could also combine it with an Alexa reminder when you open the door or something of that kind. If you had a smart home, maybe these things become a bit easier. But nonetheless, simply placing the thing before you've returned them to pocket, put a place, because keys are kind of a system one thing, aren't they? They're not really a system two thing. You know, nearly everything to do with those things becomes habituated and unthinking. And that's both, you know, it's a sensible use of our mental resources that we don't spend all our time thinking about keys, but at the same time, that's where the problems lie. So that would be my one. Here, I've got one back for you.
One other point about this. One other point about forgetting things in general is I used to have a problem with socks. So basically, I switched, and my daughter and I, for the last 10 years, wear mismatched socks. So we basically have a solution where we just don't care which socks we wear. If it's mismatching, it's fine. And we get sufficiently strange socks that nobody can think it's a mistake. Like, it's not that one is brown and one is blue. They're very, very different from each other, and that makes it acceptable. So it's a design solution for avoiding the problem from the get-go.
You probably need to buy them in roughly similar fabrics, don't you? That's the only requirement, in that it would feel a bit weird if one of them was woolen. I've never got into silk socks, promise. But, you know, you need the fabrics to be roughly similar in texture, but then the problem's solved. And, of course, you've avoided the need for pairing as well. Brilliant. Okay. I think we should make that a fashion. I've got one which is slightly more serious, but I think very valid. How can I get my family and friends to wear their masks in public? Now, I solved it for the individual. If you wear a hat, wearing a mask with a hat makes you feel like an international man of mystery, and therefore it completely changes the emotional association of being masked. Okay, but how do you get your family and friends to wear their masks in public without seeming like a complete nag?
So it's hard to do it without seeming a complete nag, but I think that the right phrase is to say, I know it's uncomfortable to wear this mask, but it makes me uncomfortable at this point when people around me don't wear a mask. Masks are complex, right? So one thing that is becoming more clear and became clear a while ago is there's not much point in wearing them outside.
No.
But the reason that some places encourage people to wear them also outside is not because it's important to wear them outside. It's for the habit creation. Because you might go outside, then you might go inside, and if you go on the habit of sometimes yes, sometimes no, that's a difficult habit to create. So the question about wearing masks, especially outside, is really tricky. It's not for its own sake, it's for the habit maintenance.
I think there was a design flaw as well, and they should have had elastic that went round the neck so that you could wear them as a kind of cravat when you weren't actually wearing them in front of your face. But now, what Guru explained is that there was a massive elastic shortage in the beginning of the COVID crisis. So that may have driven these ear loops, which strike me as slightly odd.
Yeah, and so I think that's one. The second is to create really a request. So it's a kind request. It recognizes the challenges, but nevertheless, it says, I just don't feel comfortable at this point. And in the beginning of COVID, my father actually created shirts that say, please help me keep social distances and wear a mask. So he didn't have to say it. It was written on his shirt, and he gave those shirts also to his friends. I think, for example, it would have been nice if the masks had something printed on them. it's kind of a wasted, I mean, you probably think of it as a wasted advertising space, right? It's very, like, think about all the sponsorship opportunity, but beyond that, I think it's a real opportunity to say something about, we care about each other, please, and so on, because it is a pain, especially now as the summer is getting closer. It's hot and uncomfortable.
It always struck me, your point, by the way, that it's actually habit formation rather than contagion reduction that causes us to wear them out of doors, is interesting. Because I suspect that you could have actually given permission for outdoor socialization if people were completely obedient. But the problem is that outdoor socializing tends to lead to indoor socializing. You meet in someone's garden, it gets cold, the patio heater runs out of gas. That happened at the White House. They went from the rose garden to the orangery, okay? And it created a super spreading event. So I think there are some interesting cases where the scientific advice has to be tempered by behavioural insight into what behaviours would really result from this recommendation. I think that's a really, really interesting case, that wearing masks out of doors just makes it easier for people to put them on when they're in a supermarket or elsewhere. Do you want to fire one back?
Yeah. The same, I want to say one more thing about this, is the same thing was true about the traffic light idea. So when COVID started, there was the question of, do we put a closure on the whole country, or do we basically get restrictions by city? And it makes a lot of sense to do restrictions by cities, especially if you have small towns with very low infection rates. Why would you do a closure? And the models needed to take human disobedience into account. And if you say, if the government will use the traffic light system and would say, city one, yes, city one, no, feel free to not be restricted, what would people in city two do? Would they go to city one? I mean, what would be the behavior? And because there was so much fear of disobedience, and I don't mean disobedience in a bad way, I just mean it's very hard to understand transmission. It's very hard for somebody to feel that they might be spreading when they don't feel sick. The opportunities for misbehavior are very large. So you're right that it's very important to take into account what people are capable of doing and not capable of doing when we think about these restrictions. And it's true for every policy decision.
It's interesting. A Swedish friend of mine remarked that one of the things they didn't really anticipate in Sweden is that countries that started very strict and gradually relaxed found compliance much easier than companies that started loose and then imposed restrictions one at a time. Because the direction of travel, if you like, was completely different. And so they got quite a lot of, civil disobedience is a strong word to use of Scandinavians, but they got quite a lot of dissent because every time there was a new rule about what you could do in a restaurant and people started ignoring it. Whereas if the direction of travel was towards liberalisation, they found it much, much easier. I've got to hand back for time reasons, but this has been an absolute joy, Dan, and see you soon.
I'm going to ask you the last question, and don't answer it. Don't answer it. But it was a good question. If all the speakers from Nudgestock join together and they had a fight, who would win? But don't answer this.
I'm going to think about that for the next few hours because you've sown a seed in my mind.